There's a moment in every man's life when he understands, finally and completely, that the boy he raised has become someone else's idea of who he should be. Not because he grew up, not because he moved away, but because somewhere along the line he decided the man who raised him was something to outgrow, something to leave behind like an old coat that no longer fit the weather he was walking into. For me, that moment came on a Thursday afternoon in September, in the parking lot of a hardware store, when my son handed me an envelope and told me it would be easier for everyone if I skipped his daughter's christening. My name is Walter. I'm 67 years old, and this is the story of how I almost lost my family to a zip code and how a stranger's kindness brought it back to me. Let me start at the beginning, because if I don't, you'll think I'm the villain of this story, and for a while even I believed that might be true. A man whose own son pays him to disappear from a family event must have done something unforgivable. Maybe in his eyes, I did. Maybe the unforgivable thing was spending 34 years running a small engine repair shop instead of climbing some corporate ladder. Maybe it was driving a truck with 200,000 miles on it instead of something leased and German. Maybe it was never learning to talk the way people talk when they've read the right books and gone to the right schools. His name is Marcus. Marcus Allen Doyle. He hasn't dropped the last name, not yet anyway, but I've noticed he introduces himself as Mark now, just Mark, clean and short, easy to say at a fundraiser. He married a woman named Vivian about 6 years ago. Vivian comes from money that's been in her family long enough that nobody talks about where it came from anymore, they just talk about where it's going. Her father owns 3 car dealerships and sits on the board of the regional hospital. Her mother chairs some kind of committee that plans the symphony gala every spring. Their lake house has more bathrooms than my entire childhood home had rooms. I raised Marcus mostly on my own. His mother, Diane, left when he was 4. Not dramatically, no shouting, no slammed doors. She just told me one evening over dinner that she'd taken a job 3 states away and she was leaving in the morning, and she did. She sent birthday cards for a few years. Then even those stopped. I never badmouthed her to Marcus. I figured a boy shouldn't grow up hating his mother on top of missing her. I told him she loved him in her own way, even when some nights I didn't believe it myself. I was 30 years old with a 4-year-old and a lease on a repair shop I just barely scraped together the down payment for. My own parents were gone by then, my father from a heart attack at the shop counter, my mother 2 years after that from grief as much as anything. The doctors never said it that way, but I know what I saw. I had no family within 500 miles. I had a booster seat, a stack of library books about single fatherhood, and a boy who cried himself to sleep for the better part of a year asking where his mama went. For 14 years, it was just the 2 of us. I learned to make school lunches that a growing boy wouldn't trade away. I learned to sit through Little League games in the rain because missing one felt like proof that his mother had been right to doubt me. I learned to check homework. I didn't always understand. Sitting at the kitchen table with him until 9, 10 o'clock some nights, because I'd promised myself he would never once feel like second priority to anything, not the shop, not exhaustion, not my own aching back after 12 hours under a lawnmower deck. I wasn't a perfect father. I lost my temper more than I'm proud of. But I was there. Every morning, every night, I was there. When he got into the state university on a partial engineering scholarship, I sat in my truck in the parking lot after we got the acceptance letter, and I cried for a solid 15 minutes before I trusted my face enough to walk back inside and celebrate with him properly. The scholarship covered a good chunk, but not all of it, and what it didn't cover, I found a way to cover myself. I took a second mortgage on the shop. I didn't tell him that. And I told him I was proud of him and that money was the least of his worries. And I meant every word of the second part, even while the first part was costing me sleep. College changed him. I suppose it's supposed to. Boys are supposed to grow, meet people who show them a wider world, learn there's more out there than the town they came up in. I told myself that's all it was. The new way of dressing, the new way of talking, the slow drift away from conversations about the shop, about the neighborhood, about the simple life we'd built together. I told myself it was normal. I told myself he was just becoming himself. But somewhere in those 4 years, he also became somebody else's version of what a son should look like. And in that version, there wasn't much room for a father who smelled like motor oil and lived in a house with aluminum siding that needed replacing. He met Vivian at a fraternity fundraiser his senior year. She was studying art history, the kind of degree you can afford to get when money was never going to be the thing standing between you and a good life. Her family had a place on the coast. They vacationed in places I'd only seen on television. When he proposed to her, on a hilltop overlooking a vineyard, with a ring that probably cost more than everything I owned combined, he called to tell me, and I could hear it in his voice, that particular lightness people get when they've stepped into a bigger life. And for one small, cold second, something tightened in my chest. Not jealousy, not resentment, end quote. Just a quiet, certain fear that I was about to become optional. The engagement lasted almost a year and a half. In that time, I met Vivian's parents exactly twice. The first time was at a dinner Marcus arranged, someplace downtown where the waiter wore a vest and the menu didn't list prices. I wore my one good sport coat, the one I'd bought for my own father's funeral 11 years earlier. Vivian's father, Richard, was polite in the way you're polite to a waiter, a kind of practiced courtesy that never once turned into curiosity. He asked me what I did, nodded through my answer without really hearing it, and spent the rest of dinner talking with Marcus about some investment opportunity in commercial real estate. I sat there like a piece of furniture nobody had gotten around to replacing yet. The second time was worse. It was a backyard gathering at Richard and his wife's house, meant to be casual, and I drove 90 minutes to get there. When I arrived, there were 15, 20 people I didn't know, all talking about vacation homes and country club memberships and the trouble with finding good household help these days. I stood near the drink table holding a glass of wine I didn't want, watching my son move through that crowd like he'd been born into it, laughing at jokes I didn't understand, touching elbows the way people do when they're working a room. When he passed near me, he didn't slow down. He just said, "Hey, Dad," and kept moving. I left early. He didn't notice. The wedding planning started about 10 months before the date. I wasn't involved much, which I understood. Weddings are complicated, there's catering and florists and seating charts, things I don't know the first thing about. But I kept waiting for something that would tell me I was still a part of it and not just a name on a guest list somebody would eventually have to justify. That call never came. Instead, I got a text message. "Dad, can we grab coffee Saturday? Something I want to talk to you about." I knew. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. There was something in the formality of it. The way it didn't end, with a smiley face, or a, "see you then." The way he called it something to talk about instead of just catching up. That Saturday I got to the diner 20 minutes early. I ordered black coffee and sat in a booth by the window and watched the town go by outside. A young couple crossing the street holding hands. A woman pushing a stroller with one hand and holding a phone to her ear with the other. An old man on the corner tossing bits of a pretzel to the pigeons like he had nowhere else on earth to be. I thought about every Saturday I'd spent in my life. Most of them at the shop, a handful of them in a hospital waiting room the year Marcus had his appendix out at 9 years old. None of them had ever felt like this. None of them had ever felt like sitting in a waiting room before surgery, not knowing yet what the doctor was going to say. Marcus walked in right at 11. He was wearing a blazer I didn't recognize, his hair cut shorter and neater than I'd ever seen it. He was carrying a manila folder, which struck me as strange for a coffee date with your father. He slid into the booth across from me and didn't hug me, didn't shake my hand, just sat down and set the folder on the table between us like it was the whole reason he'd come. "Dad," he said, "I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet. He took a breath. He looked at the folder, then at me, then back at the folder. And then he said the words, "I will carry with me until the day I die." Vivian's family is very particular about how things look. There's going to be press there. Dad, 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 and particular and setter and press that of that. The society page, some of Richard's business contacts, people who matter for what comes next in my career. He paused. I don't know how to say this without it sounding terrible, so I'm just going to say it. We think it would be better, for everyone, if you weren't at the wedding. I waited. I knew what was coming, but I needed to hear him say it. "It's not that I don't love you," he continued, and his voice had gone soft now, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "It's not that at all. But you understand how this world works. Dad, the clothes, the way you talk about the shop, the truck. People will ask questions. Richard's business partners will ask questions. I need this day to be perfect. I need it to look a certain way. He slid the folder toward me. Inside was a check. $15,000. This is from me and Vivian, he said. We want you to take a trip somewhere. Somewhere nice. Just, please, don't come to the wedding. End quote. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. It's not that I don't want you there, he said quickly, like adding more words might soften the shape of what he'd already said. It's that I can't have you there as you are. I've worked too hard to build this life, Dad. I can't have people whispering. I can't have Richard's associates asking why my father smells like a garage. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His hand was warm. Mine felt like it belonged to someone else. Please don't hate me for this, he said. Just take the money. Please. For me. I looked at him for a long time. I looked at this young man who used to fall asleep in my lap during Sunday cartoons, who used to draw pictures of the two of us standing next to my truck and tell his teacher that was his whole family right there and that was enough, who used to run to the door every evening when he heard my truck in the driveway, and I would swing him up onto my shoulders and he'd laugh like I'd just performed a miracle. I tried to find that boy somewhere behind the eyes looking back at me now. I tried and I couldn't. So I did something that surprised us both. I picked up the folder. I opened it, looked at the check, and closed it again. And I said, okay. Marcus blinked. Okay? Okay, I said again. If that's what you need, if that's what makes this easier for you, okay. End quote. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the entire conversation. He actually smiled, a real smile, relief written across his whole face like he'd just cleared the last hurdle before his perfect day. He stood up, leaned over, and kissed the top of my head. Quick. The kind of kiss you give someone when your mind is already somewhere else. Thank you, Dad, he said. You have no idea what this means. Then he walked out of that diner and into the afternoon sun, and I sat there for another hour while my coffee went cold, the waitress asking twice if I wanted a refill, me saying no both times, just staring at the space where my son had been sitting. I drove home in silence. No radio, just the sound of the road and my own breathing and $15,000 folded inside a manila envelope on the passenger seat. The number rattling around in my head. $15,000. That's what my son believed it would cost to make me disappear from the most important day of his life. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. I went to the shop, and I fixed engines. I came home to a quiet house and ate whatever was easiest to microwave. I was a ghost wandering through rooms I'd lived in for 30 years. Then, 9 days before the wedding, the phone rang at nearly midnight. I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Mr. Doyle? A woman's voice, young, shaking. Speaking, I said. This is Vivian, Marcus's fiancée. A long pause. I need to talk to you. I'm parked outside your house right now. I didn't know who else to call. Parked. My chest went tight. Vivian had never called me in her life. Not once in a year and a half. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain, and there was her car, a silver sedan, idling at the curb, headlights off, just sitting there in the dark. Come in, I said. The porch lights on. She came up the walk slowly, wrapped in a coat too thin for the night air, and when she stepped into the light of my doorway, I could see her eyes were swollen from crying. She stood there a moment, looking at the chipped paint on my doorframe, the worn welcome mat, the modest little house she'd probably never once imagined setting foot inside. Then she started to cry again, right there on the step. I stepped aside and let her in. I sat her down on my couch, brought her a glass of water she didn't touch, and waited. It took her a long time to get the words out, but when she finally did, she said, I found the check stub in Marcus's desk. The copy, Poppy. It said buyout, keep father away from wedding. I confronted him tonight. Her voice cracked. He admitted everything. Everything. I didn't say anything. I let her keep going. I asked him how he could do that to you, she said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. You know what he told me? He said, it was practical. He said Richard's business partners would judge him, that it would hurt his career, that image mattered more right now than feelings. She looked up at me, and something in her face had changed. Something had cracked open. Mr. Doyle, I grew up in that world. The one Marcus is so desperate to belong to. My father has never once missed a chance to remind me what our name is worth. And you know what I remember most from my whole childhood? Not the vacations, not the parties. I remember my father missing my college graduation because of a board meeting. I remember him shaking my hand at my own engagement party like I was a business contact instead of his daughter. Tears were running freely now. I told Marcus I couldn't marry a man who would do to his own father what my father did to me. I told him the wedding was off, tonight. I meant it. I sat there holding a glass of water I'd forgotten to give her, feeling something shift inside my chest, something I couldn't yet name. You raised him alone, Vivian said quietly. He told me that once, early on, like it was something to apologize for. Like being raised by a man who showed up every single day was something shameful instead of the rarest thing in the world. She shook her head. End quote. The blate de serd RXAS. I've been to 100 dinners with men who show up to everything except the things that matter. And you showed up to everything, and he's ashamed of it. Do you understand how backwards that is? That I didn't trust myself to speak yet. My throat had closed up tight. I broke off the engagement, she said again, like she needed to say it twice to believe it herself. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if it's permanent. But I couldn't let it happen, not like this, not built on erasing the one person who never once let him down. We sat in my living room a long while after that, the clock ticking, the refrigerator humming from the kitchen, and for the first time in more than a week, I felt something other than shame. I felt seen. The days that followed were chaos. Marcus called me 11 times. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that started angry, accusing me of ruining everything, then turned pleading, then finally just quiet, just his voice cracking, saying he didn't know what he was thinking, saying he was scared of disappointing Richard, saying none of that was an excuse and he knew it. I listened to every one of them. I didn't call back. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say to a son who'd looked me in the eye and priced me out of his life. Vivian kept in touch, though. She came by twice more that week. We didn't talk about Marcus. Not directly. We talked about her childhood, the loneliness of growing up with everything except attention. I talked about raising Marcus alone, the double shifts, the secondhand clothes, the nights I skipped dinner so there'd be enough for him and never told him why. Two people from entirely different worlds, sitting in a small house on the wrong side of town, discovering we understood each other better than either of us understood the people we'd built our lives around. The wedding was supposed to be a Saturday, 300 guests, a country club that wouldn't have let a man like me pass the front gate under any other circumstance. Instead, that Saturday I woke up alone in my house. I made coffee. I watched the morning news. And around 10 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. It was Marcus, no blazer this time. Jeans and an old flannel shirt I recognized from high school, one I didn't even know he'd kept. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. One, Dad, he said. Can we get breakfast? There's that diner on 5th. The one with the sign that's missing half its letters. I used to think it was the ugliest place in town. I don't know why I want to go there today, but I do. I almost laughed. I grabbed my jacket instead and followed him out. We sat in a cracked vinyl booth and ordered eggs and coffee, and for a long while neither of us said much. Finally, he set his fork down and said, I've been thinking about my whole life, Dad, about every ballgame you sat through in the rain. Every homework assignment you helped with even when you didn't understand half of it yourself. I've been thinking about how I built this entire version of myself around never being you, and I don't even know why that felt necessary. You were never something to escape. I didn't say anything right away. I let him keep going. Vivian and I talked, he said. Not about getting back together. Just talked. She told me some things about her own father that made me sick to my stomach. Because I realized I was becoming him. A man who measures love by how it looks to other people instead of what it actually is. He looked up at me, eyes red. I don't know what happens next with her. I don't know if there's a version of us that survives this. But I know I can't keep being someone who trades his father for a seating chart. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. the way I used to when he was small and scared of something in the dark. I raised you, I said, and I love you. I loved you the moment they put you in my arms, red-faced and screaming like you already had opinions about the whole situation. I loved you through skinned knees and report cards, and every rotten decision a teenage boy can make. I'll love you until I die. I paused. But loving you doesn't mean I'll pretend that check didn't happen. Loving you doesn't mean showing up somewhere I wasn't actually wanted. Sometimes loving someone means stepping back and letting them sit with what they did so they can figure out on their own what they actually value. He nodded slowly, tears slipping down his face without him bothering to wipe them away. 6 weeks later, Vivian showed up at my door again. This time she wasn't crying. This time she looked steadier, calmer, like someone who'd spent the time doing real work on herself. I came to tell you something, she said. I told my father I was done letting his idea of a good life dictate mine. I told him if he couldn't respect the people I love, he could keep his invitations to himself. She smiled, small but genuine. Marcus and I are trying again, slowly, with rules this time. And one of the rules is, you're not an inconvenience to be managed. You're his father. You're at every table from now on, or there's no table. Marcus and Vivian were married the following spring. Not at the country club. A small ceremony in my own backyard. Of all places, string lights hung between the maple trees, 40 guests instead of 300, a barbecue instead of a 5-course dinner. Richard came, quieter than I'd ever seen him, and shook my hand at the end of the night and said, low enough that only I could hear, I've got some things to think about myself. I nodded and told him it's never too late to start. I walked Vivian's mother-in-law duties aside for a moment that evening. If you can believe an old mechanic gets asked to make a toast, and I kept it short. I said that love isn't measured in country clubs or seating charts or what car sits in the driveway. I said it's measured by who's still standing beside you when you've got nothing left to offer but yourself. I said the truest wealth I ever had in this life was a boy who used to run to the door every evening just to see my face, and somehow, after everything, I got him back. The $15,000 is still in a drawer in my nightstand, folded inside that same manila envelope, tucked beside an old photograph of Marcus on his first day of kindergarten, gap-toothed and grinning like the whole world was still simple. I never spent it. I never will. Some nights I take it out and hold it, not out of anger anymore, not out of hurt, but because I need to remember how close I came to losing everything that ever actually mattered, and how a young woman I barely knew had the courage to knock on a stranger's door at midnight because her conscience wouldn't let her stay quiet. That's what I want you to take from this. Success was never about the size of a bank account or the address on an invitation. It's measured by who shows up when you have nothing left to give. And love isn't a transaction. It can't be bought back with a check, and it can't be priced out with one either. It's something you choose every single day, especially on the days it's hard. And sometimes, the person who breaks your heart is the same person who spends the rest of their life trying to put it back together. Sometimes redemption arrives wearing a stranger's face, knocking on your door at midnight, refusing to let a good man be erased without a fight. My name is Walter. I'm 67 years old. I still run the shop most days, though my hands aren't what they used to be. I still drive that old truck. And I am the richest man I know, because my son found his way back to me. And no envelope, no check, no amount of money in this world could ever be worth more than that.